talking about it, you'll see some resemblances to the Atkins diet or the sugar buster diet, etc., which is a low carb situation. Okay? So one of the first things I always ask when I talk about this is if I ask people, why do you gain weight? Okay? So just answer that question for yourself in your head. I won't call on anybody to answer it, but just answer, why do you gain weight? Most people will tell you, or tell me, that they gain weight because they either eat too much or they don't exercise enough. All right? Now, what I'm going to tell you is that's wrong. That's not why you gain weight. Okay? But that's the common misconception. So what happens every January? Every January, people make a commitment to lose weight. They make a New Year's resolution, and what they do is they decide that they're heavy, they gain weight because they ate too much, so they cut their calories. They eat less, okay? Or they go on some diet plan, or they don't eat as many calories, etc. And then they join the health club. They're going to exercise. And then what happens to every New Year's resolution? It goes for about 6 weeks, and it stops, okay? And that's going to fail just about every time, because what happens is when you cut your calories down, you eat less, what happens? You get hungry, okay? And if you cut your calories too much, you don't even feel like exercising because your body tells you to get sedentary. So you can't eat less because then you get hungry and you want to eat more. Okay, so you're always fighting the refrigerator. Oh, I'm hungry, but I can't eat. Well, then you kind of play that game for a while, and then you say, well, I'll exercise more. Well, what happens when you exercise really hard? You get hungry. So now you want to eat. But now you exercise real hard, you want to eat, and now what you're forced into is I have to eat less calories, which makes you more hungry, and you get into this vicious cycle, and your body cannot take that. Now, it's true that some people get successful on some diet plans, but you're always working against yourself in this kind of situation, okay? So, if I just put a little circle here, and I'm going to call this adipose tissue. So, for those of you, what adipose tissue is, it's this stuff on your waistline, okay? It's what we call, the common person calls fat, okay? We'll call that adipose tissue. And what happens in, for example, males in the middle age spread, if this is your waistline, the male experiences what? My waistline is getting bigger. All right? He says, I'm getting fat. Now, why is this adipose tissue growing? All right, that's what's happening. Your adipose tissue is growing. And what you observe somebody like that, like a middle-aged male whose waistline is growing, what you will see if you observe him, your observations is when he's getting fat, he's eating a lot, okay? He eats a lot, and he doesn't feel like exercising. He's the couch potato, he's sedentary. So he's sedentary. Now that's what you observe visually, looking at this person. Joe, you're sitting on the couch, you're eating too much, you got the potato chips, you got the beer out, you got to stop that, okay? So this is what we observe. And everybody thinks that the reason his adipose tissue is growing is because he's eating too much and he's sitting on the couch. Okay, and I just told you that's wrong. So that's hard for people to get their head around, okay? Because you've been told over and over and over again that the reason you gain weight is because of those two things. And this is what you try to attack, okay? And that attack fails almost 90% of the time. So let me give you this situation over here. Let's say we have a teenage boy. Okay, and he's growing, and this is his bone. All right, he's 5'2", and he's going to grow to be 6'2". So what's happening to his bone tissue? This is bone tissue. That's adipose tissue. So what happens in this teenage boy? His bone tissue is growing, just like the adipose tissue is in a middle-aged man. Now, if you look at this teenage boy, what do you see him doing? You see him eating a lot. That's what you observe. And you say, boy, or wow, that boy is growing tall, his bone tissue is growing tall, because he's eating a lot. That's what you observe, just like you would observe the middle-aged man whose waistline is growing, whose adipose tissue is growing. And you would say, his bone is growing a lot because he's eating a lot. Okay? And I'm telling you that's wrong. Why is this teenage boy's bone growing? What's the real reason? The real reason is something called growth hormone. In the adolescent years, growth hormone kicks in, tells his bone tissue to grow. It starts growing, and when it starts growing, it tells the brain, okay, all these mechanisms that you have, you better start eating to support the bone growth. So your observation here, the logical observation that you can observe with your eyes, is actually telling you something wrong. Because what's really happening is growth hormone is driving the bone growth, the growth of the bone tissue. So let's go back to the situation at hand for the reason you all came out here. When the middle-aged man's waistline is growing, when his adipose tissue is growing, why does that grow? That grows because of a hormone called insulin. And when you have high insulin levels, insulin drives the growth of adipose tissue. Insulin is the principal regulator of fat metabolism. Okay? And so when you have high insulin levels, you're going to start your adipose tissue to grow. What basically happens is when you eat a meal that is high carb, okay, if you have a high carbohydrate meal, which is sugar, sugar causes insulin secretion. When the insulin gets high, the nutrients go into the adipose tissue. All right, insulin drives them into the adipose tissue, and that's where they go. Okay, and they make this adipose tissue grow. So, all right. So just like with bone, there's a hormone driving this growth. For adipose tissue, there's a hormone driving that growth, and that's insulin. Okay. Now you all have heard of insulin, and you've generally heard it associated with what? Diabetes, right? And that's true, that it regulates the carbohydrates, but it's also, the fancy word is, it's the prepotent arbiter of fat metabolism. Prepotent means most powerful, arbiter means controller. It's the most powerful controller of fat metabolism, insulin. So that's what you have to get a handle on. Now, as far as diets go, let me show you something here. And this comes from the literature from this book. These are published results. And I have 4 of them here. I'll just give you 2. All right? Let's just call this diet 1. And this diet 2. And in diet 1, they took a group of subjects and put them on a long-term diet, 8 weeks, 6 months, whatever. Okay? And they put this group here on a diet 2,200 calories per day. And I'm going to leave a little blank here for a minute. And the other group at 1,200 calories per day. I'm going to leave a little blank. Now, if I ask you what group lost the most amount of weight, which one do you say? Well, if you're thinking from the misconception, you would say, well, this group, obviously, because they only ate 1,200 calories per day, and these guys are eating 22.